Patrick Klepek, let's start by talking about our overall thoughts on Loki Season 2, Episode 3. And then we're going to do a detailed recap, spoil everything, talk about some specific scenes. So overall, Patrick, what did you think of this episode?
Well, one thing that you and I were wondering was, okay, like, where's Jonathan Majors? Like, we know the reason that for an expensive show, they didn't go back and do something perhaps understandable, like reshoot it, is because, well, it seems like he's pretty critical to the story they're telling here. And the answer in season 3 is, yeah, like, he's about to become the main character.
Season 2, I think you mean.
Season 2, yes. And in episode 3, like, it makes very clear that Jonathan Majors isn't going anywhere in the show, and is probably someone who is going to be very present in most, if not all, scenes through the rest of the series. And so, you know, it's so tough. You're finally forced to, like, truly then start confronting, like, I think a lot of the fears that folks like myself that are looking forward to this season, and that, like, we're waiting with bated breath about once the accusations and allegations towards Jonathan Majors came out. What am I supposed to do with those feelings? How am I supposed to untangle that from an actor who is capable of giving extremely powerful and interesting performances? And I don't know how powerful this performance is in this episode, but it's certainly interesting. It is definitely a demonstration of Majors. Well, he's trying something. I don't know how well
choices were made. Decisions were made.
I don't know how well it works for me. And like, that's where I end up, like, feeling just very messy on this episode. Like, it's a big swing. It makes me, like, if I try to detach myself, like, a little more interested in where the season is going, but I find it very difficult to untangle my like external thoughts on this actor and the actions they've taken in the real world, because there's just no way to avoid them here. They are front and center and the centerpiece of it. And, but, like, as a episode, I mean, holy shit, like, it seems like we're on a lot of sets. Like, the costuming is great. Like, the set design is fantastic. Like, there's people everywhere. Like, I mean, it's like, I don't know, I found a lot of that, like, genuinely thrilling and fun and interesting. We get lots of great beats with Mobius and Loki just hanging out, like, some of the strongest parts of the show. Like, the show recognizes, hey, even in an episode where, like, Kang, here comes Kang, or however, the show is going to handle this particular version of him, we're still going to give lots of comedic, quiet moments to these characters, and I think that's to the show's benefit. But yeah, definitely one that I come out of with really mixed feelings, even though I find myself at least a little more interested in where the central arc of the show is going from here.
Definitely a messy episode. But let me start by talking about some of the positive aspects, which you brought up already. First of all, this episode looks like it cost, I'm going to estimate, $30 to $40 million.
I feel like you're seeing a lot of the budget of the show in this specific episode.
And, like, they bring, 1800s Chicago to life in a really vibrant, vivid way that is, like, genuinely impressive from a production design standpoint. And every component of production comes together in a really amazing way. Like, the sets, the murals on the walls, the number of extras and background artists, the costuming, like, everything is just coalescing in a way to make it feel like, oh, this episode oozes money. The fact that they redid the Marvel intro with the old-timey man,
that was great.
Awesome, right? You also point out how there's some parts with, like, Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson hanging out. By far the strongest points of the whole show. I wish, like, there would just be more of that. You don't need, but then again, same thing freaking happened as this last week, where it's like, I'm enjoying these guys kind of going on a little adventure. By the way, they're dressed impeccably. They look awesome, right? And I could not pull off those outfits, but but I wish I could, because they look amazing in them. And so, so I love their vibe and their rapport. It's just they got great chemistry, and that's, like, rare to see on anything. When you have it, you want to use it, you want to see it as often as possible. But then, of course, it's interrupted by all these plot machinations, some of which are fairly nonsensical. So those are some of the great things about the episode. It's like, looks amazing. We get some more Mobius and Loki time. Awesome. The weak elements of the episode are virtually everything else. I think the Jonathan Majors, Victor Timely is like a fairly disastrous portrayal, is what I would say. I think it's very mannered and he's clearly going for it. And I honestly thought there was going to be a moment where it was revealed that the way he speaks is a put on, like, because
Yeah, I kept waiting for that as
he's
well.
yeah,
The whole
exactly.
point is that he's a con man.
Yeah, like he's a con man. So it's like, I'm thinking like, oh, that's not actually the way he speaks. Um, but I think it's difficult for me to. The reason why it doesn't work is not because somebody's speaking at a different cadence. It's because it's difficult for me to see this as anything other than Jonathan Majors, putting on these mannerisms and this cadence, right? Like I could never lose myself in seeing just an actor, like just a character. I saw an actor talking in a specific way, playing a specific character, as opposed to just he's
Mhm.
vanished into the role, and that was distracting for me. But again, I just want to clarify: it's not because he speaks slowly or has a specific cadence. It's just like
Right.
the performance itself. And then the problem I have with this show is most of or many of the times you don't know why characters are doing what they're doing. Like, why is so and so doing this thing? Well, specifically, the character in question is Ravonna Renslayer in this case, right? Like, why is she taking the actions she's taking in this episode? And concealing the reasons can be interesting, dramatically effective. Um, but I think the show does it too often to the point where it's difficult to even understand. And by the way, the motivations of Ravonna Renslayer were revealed to us, but can we take them at face value? Like, is she lying? Like, I can't even trust that like what was revealed is actually true.
Well,
So
especially because, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but in your broad criticism of this for the first season especially is the end of an episode and then and like
aha,
we don't get
aha,
the but we get the tease for an
and
that
aha in the
may
future.
reveal reasons for previous actions, but in a way that does not feel satisfying to the viewer. It is more satisfying from like, I'm in a writer's room and like, oh, that'll be clever. Like
Exactly.
that'll be this onion that will peel
So
away.
maybe at some point we'll get an explanation for why Ravonna is doing what she's doing, but it's like it doesn't make for a particularly satisfying experience in the short term. And it would be fine if the show did that with like one character, but it seems to do that with everyone, and or many of the characters. And I think that's the real problem. Is it continuously prizes surprising people versus telling an engaging story in and of itself. So those problems from the second episode, I think, continue in this episode. Um, and but we'll see how it shapes out. There's still enough like cool things to look at that it's like worth checking out the show.
Yeah.
But
There's
so far,
juggling so many arcs.
yeah,
I
so far
mean,
it's very, again, very jumbled from a storytelling perspective. So anyway, those are some overall thoughts on season 2, episode 3. All right, Patrick Klepek, let's get to our thoughts on what actually happened. We're not going to spoil everything that happened in season 2, episode 3. We open in 1868 Chicago within the sacred timeline as Ravonna Renslayer, the first time we've seen her this season in the flesh, by the way. Tasked by the TVA's rogue AI Miss Minutes to track down a variant of He Who Remains. Miss Minutes claims she was told by He Who Remains to have Renslayer to place a special book, a TVA manual, in the window of a young Kang variant, ensuring he'll rise to power. Renslayer is promised that she'll be rewarded. Let's pause here for a minute. There was like a scene in Family Guy a long time ago. It was just like, you know how Family Guy has lots of like offhanded references, and I just remember there was a moment. It was like, I don't remember exactly what the reference was, but it was kind of like they cut to people watching the TV show Family Guy at some point, right? Like in the show Family Guy, they cut to people watching Family Guy, and somebody was like, so what? Does a family like hear the dog speaking? Can they hear? Can they hear the baby? Like, is that how that works? That's kind of how I feel about Miss Minutes. I'm like, so like, does she occupy like physical space? I guess people can see her, but she doesn't. She can't actually touch anything. Like I'm trying to figure out like what the rules are with Miss Minutes. Which, by the way, in my opinion, have been very poorly established. Am I wrong about this, Patrick
I
Klepper?
don't. I think poorly established is actually a charitable way of interpreting the word established.
Yes.
I mean, Miss Minutes, like now that she has become like a formal character with motivations,
Yes.
very. We'll get into
Yeah.
her motivations later in the episode, but I think if you're going to forward her as not just a plot device, but actually like a motivating character for the
Yeah.
actions of so many things that are occurring in the show, it is then kind of incumbent on you to actually establish her. Like, how does Miss Minutes work? Like, how do I think of her as a like?
Right.
Because in the first season, it's mostly like this is just cute. It's a like
Yeah.
fun performance. Like, it's a really neat like mashup of aesthetic, and then okay, sure, makes sense that here in the TVA she'd have access to everything. Like, I buy it. Like, I don't need it explained to me. It fits enough of the logic of the world around me. But once we've started going into the timelines and into the quote real world, I'm with you. Like, is she messing with perception? Like, is she actually black and white? And even that then
Right.
mashes up with, and this is like speaks to how complicated and convoluted like the MCU is getting. It's like, wait. Okay, so if I've watched like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and I saw like the post-credits scene with like all the Kangs, like the whole thing here is that Kang is inevitable, right? Like, the reason like it's bad that He Who Remains was killed and all these branches aren't being pruned and these variants aren't being pruned is because we'll just come back no matter what. But in this case, Miss Minutes is bringing him back. Like, would this person become Kang if like this manual wasn't here? So like, that's not inevitable. That's you messing. And so you're just, maybe that'll be explained later on. And
Yeah.
my guess is that Miss Minutes is like purposely like futzing with the timeline to her own ends, and Kang is nonetheless inevitable, and that'll be something that happens with Victor Timely over the course of the season. But I don't know, like once you start thinking about all of that, which the show is not forwarding, but it's there in the background, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
if it starts to I'm plenty fine with accepting goofy things at face value if it feels right. But increasingly, especially when like the plotting isn't working as well, the characters aren't working as well, your brain starts to then process those other things. Like, yeah, but what if that's not working? Like, why are we doing this? And I think that's how stories that exist and like this level of high fantasy and suspension of disbelief start to buckle under themselves. And that's how rules can help you. But so far, the show does not seem particularly interested in establishing them.
It's also a situation where the show is obsessed with plot mechanics. And constantly you have people like Kihue Kwan shouting plot things at the other characters or the other. If we don't do this to the temporal loom, then this is going to happen. It feels like an episode of Star Trek where they're like, if we don't decouple the power stuff from the blah blah blahs, like they're always like explaining stuff to you. So for them to just not describe Miss Minutes at all, like I think they just refer to her as like a rogue AI
Yeah.
basically. But it's like, okay, a rogue AI who can take physical form.
Right, he gets turned into a kaiju
Can
and
turn
scare
into
a bunch of
kaiju?
people.
Okay, anyway.
I mean, it's well, and to your point, it's it just feels like it's constantly sort of like losing its own thread to grasp onto, and I think that becomes very frustrating as the viewer as it goes on, which I think is reflected in our own impressions of like how this has continued forth.
Agreed. Back at the TVA, OB is panicked over the continued meltdown. Desperate, Loki and Mobius decide to follow Renslayer's tempad. So the idea is that the temporal loom, because of, I'm going to say, events that occurred in episode 1 that I'm not even going to bother to rehash here, is like it can't handle the increase in number of
It's like
time threads.
Ghostbusters. Like, there's too many ghosts in here.
There's too many ghosts. Exactly right. And so they need, but they're like, they can hack into the system if they have the temporal aura of the person that designed the system, which we now know is He Who Remains, right? So Loki and Mobius, they want to get He Who Remains, get them to the TVA. They can use his temporal aura to stop the temporal loom from melting down. That's kind of the motivating incident. Loki and Mobius end up in Chicago in 1893, which also happens to be hosting the World's Fair. The two eventually stumble upon an advertisement for a man named Victor Timely, who claims to be putting on a demonstration for temporal marvels. At the show, the two notice the presence of Renslayer and on stage, Victor Timely. This version of He Who Remains, aka Victor Timely, is much younger and has a much different speaking cadence and personality than who we met at the end of the first season. He claims to be developing a way to harness time as a form of energy, and that even time itself is capable of being manipulated. And I'll just keep going here. After demonstrating a prototype of a temporal loom, Timely leaves the stage and is cornered by Renslayer, Loki, and Mobius, and a swarm of other parties who want to cash in on Timely's promises. He holds a bidding war for the patents to his work, which turns out to be a massive con. In fact, a lot of what Timely's up to is a con, even if his interest in time is true. Timely's chased into the crowd of the World's Fair when his tricks are discovered, and he stumbles into a Ferris wheel with Loki, where Sylvie appears. She's determined to make good on her promise to kill every variant of He Who Remains, and a war of words and magic powers between Loki and Sylvie results in Timely falling out of the Ferris wheel, only to be discovered by Renslayer, who calls upon Miss Minutes to become a kaiju-sized monster to clear an escape path. So let's pause here and just talk a little bit about what's going on here.
Whew, a lot. You know that when I mentioned in a previous episode that sometimes when I do the recaps, it's like, wow, I'm just like scooting forward in this playback, and like there's not much for me to write up. It's just characters talking. Move on to the next thing.
Not
that whole stretch that you just went through was like, oh shit, there's like 100 things that I need to write down. And I think it's other than useful as a framing device for you and I to talk about the episode. I think when read back to the listener, people listening to this podcast or people watching, in various platforms, I think you get a sense of like what we're talking about, like the difference between like character moments and plotting when you are forced to then summarize it. Because yes, this episode is 50-ish minutes. Like it's long by a lot of Marvel television show standards. And yet when like laid out what all happens there in about 15-ish minutes is like, why are you putting in this many characters and this many actions tied up in this many, like this few scenes? It's just way too much for the show to, even if it was exquisitely written, which I don't think it is. Like, it's just like anything would buckle under this much weight. It just cannot support this much meaningfully in the time span that it's given and the structure that it's given.
Completely agreed. And excellent job on the recap as usual, Patrick. But let's talk about a few things that happen in this sequence. I mean, there's a few things that I actually really appreciate. First of all, again, just love the two characters, Mobius and Loki, hanging out. I love that they see a representation of Norse mythology.
Oh, that was great.
And it's like Odin, Thor, and Balder. And Loki's like, why is Balder there? Like, no one knows who that guy is. Balder is an MCU character, by the way. And I don't think we've seen him depicted in the MCU, Balder the Brave. So it's very possible it's a reference to something that will happen sooner. But that's always been one of the things that is amusing to me that the show doesn't really explore, is the difference between what happens with the Norse gods in the world of the MCU and the stories that people on Earth tell about the Norse gods. Like there's a huge gulf between those things, and the show hasn't really explored that, and it's a nice nod to that when that happened in this episode. I really like the concept of He Who Remains, or Victor Timely as a character, because Victor Timely in many ways is like a tragic figure in the context of this episode. Imagine having the idea for the iPhone, but it's 500 AD. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like you can't even begin to. There's no electricity. There's no app developer. Like, it's like that's a tragic thing if somebody was able to think up something like the iPhone, but it's 500 AD. Like,
someone gives you a stock tip, but the stock market doesn't exist. Well, this would make me rich,
right? Exactly.
If there was a way to do anything with this information,
exactly.
That is like, I think that actually is I think you're right. It's like if you peel back what the idea is behind that character, like the idea of being handed a golden ticket, but not knowing what to do with it. I mean,
or not having the ability to really make it happen. Now, I mean, based off of the technology we see in Victor Timely's lab, maybe he will eventually
he seems to be on the path towards all that little flickering sure seemed awfully temporal loomy.
Right, but as we're introduced to him, it's like, oh, he has this thing that like doesn't necessarily work that well, but you
Right.
can see it's going to become the temporal loom. How this version of Victor Timely like plugs into everything we've seen is remains to be seen. Um, but I like that core idea, and then maybe like the future, more successful version of you sent a book back in time so that
Mm-hmm.
you could like kickstart your time machinations. Like those are cool ideas that I like that this show brings up. And again, we should spend more time on those things instead of we got to zip to the next like action scene or Sylvie and Loki fighting each other again. Like that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Sylvie's here again. Sylvie's awesome. I love the character. I love her and Loki interacting. But like, we didn't know that was. It's again another thing where it's like surprise, Sylvie's here. A fight scene,
It's like
and
they
it's
use
like
the
okay,
magic powers as an excuse to like take the chess pieces and like, well, there's no real way to get them here, but like,
right.
thankfully, we have undefined
But
magic
Sylvie's
powers
magic.
that Sylvie
It's
can.
like we need another action scene. Oh, who should do it? Sylvie. Well, how's she getting there? She just gets there. Like it's
The green stuff. Don't worry about it. Don't
yeah,
worry
whatever.
about it.
So it's like yeah, okay. It's not bad. It's not like an incompetently
No.
shot scene or anything like that. It's like perfectly solid, but it just um as with the final sequence in the last episode, like no setup. She just kind of comes in out of nowhere. She does play a significant role in the rest of the episode. But I wish, the stuff that the show brings up is what I'm trying to say is it's genuinely interesting material. Anything else? Oh, I do also want to give a shout out to the fact that I think we saw a clip from this scene in one of the post-credit scenes of Quantumania. Am I right about that?
Correct. Yes. Like basically them arriving at the showcase for the temporal marvels.
I think it was
is
already going on, if I
Mhm.
recall correctly, when in the scene. So what I appreciated, I'm just gonna say, I'm part of the problem, Patrick. I was like, hey, that's the scene from the thing because because when you see that scene in Quantumania, like, so there's a scene of Mobius and Loki watching Victor Timely, like that's the post credit scene.
Mhm.
And when I first saw it, I was like, what is even going on? Like at the end of Loki season 1, Mobius and Loki don't even know each other. So like, how is the show going to deal with that? Why are they back in time? And why is there an 19th century version of Kang there? Like, what's going on? And it's cool to just kind of have all those questions kind of answered, at least partially, with this episode of the show. So those are some like shout outs, some big ups I want to give to this episode and this sequence in particular. Patrick Klepek, any thoughts about World's Fair Chicago 1893?
Well, it's always nice as someone that I never tell people that know Illinois geography or have any familiarity with Chicago that I'm from Chicago, because I'm not. I'm from the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Those are different things. But I'll tell someone that doesn't know anything about Chicago, like, oh yeah, I'm from Chicago. Because what am I going to say? I'm
Right.
from the north, like the northwest. So, but it's always nice. Chicago never gets depicted in. It's not. It's in like gangster media, like that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
that's about it. It's rarely in video games. Like Chicago, despite having some really iconic skylines and
Right.
architecture and looks, is rarely seen in a lot of the stuff I watch. It's always New York and it's always LA or it's Vancouver or like being New York or LA or something like that. And so it's a small thing, but it's always nice for like the city that means the most to me because it's the one I live in closest proximity to, the one I spend the most time in personally. It may not be modern day Chicago, but it is cool
Yeah.
to see a version of
I'm gonna say
Chicago here.
it is hilarious that you're praising the show Chicago
Mhm.
depiction, which depends zero on modern day Chicago being
I'm
filmed in
taking
any
these.
way.
These are called scraps, David, and I'm taking them and I'm putting them in my mouth and I'm chewing on them.
It's
And
just what I will say is it's just amazing to see a show depict any part of America from the 1800s.
yeah,
Like it's just like, hey, this takes a bunch of ambition and work, like below the line work to get it done. And I thought they did a wonderful job. They seemed to build what appeared to be a functional Ferris wheel. Like I don't think it was,
yeah.
but like
But
it,
yeah, it at least felt like it.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm, it hits on the version of the show that doesn't exist. When we talked about like, what if the show was just sliders. And it's like, how cool would it be that like every episode opens with them walking out of a time portal and just like, what like fabulous costumes are they wearing this time to like blend into the scene they're in? And I now worry. I worry desperately that like that part of the show is more or less over, and we're about to spend a lot of time
back at the TVA, probably
back
right?
at the TVA with like sad, not yet Kang, grappling with becoming Kang.
Sad, not yet Kang.
And
the worst kind of Kang. Sad, not yet Kang.
The worst variant of them all. Just emo Kang, just trying to listening to Fall Out Boy and working through his feelings. But I just, it's a different type of show. It's one that's maybe less dour, but I just would have been so fun to see those two actors be like, kind of like Back to the Future, right? Like, we're off to the Wild West, and like, here's the get-ups that they're wearing. Like, how much fun would that be? Just solving, and even then, like, not even involving Kang. They're just solving time travel crimes. Oh, something's going on in this. We got a ping from this, branch. Like, time to go figure it out.
They should have really conceived this as a Law and Order procedural style show, right?
Law and Order TVA unit, please. Like that is really what I was looking for.
There is a really cool shot in this episode of Loki where they walk through one portal in like earlier Chicago and then enter the World's Fair in Chicago. That was an incredible shot. Like, I love showing how the portals work and all that stuff. So big shout out to that. All right. Back at Timely's home, he shows off some of his experiments and tries to understand why so many people are suddenly interested in him. Renslayer and Miss Minutes do their best to explain the concept of time travel variance and his eventual destiny. The group is quickly interrupted by folks who were previously seeking Timely, and the three smuggle aboard a nearby boat in search of Timely's lab. On the boat, Timely reveals how the TVA manual changed his life and discovers Renslayer is the one who delivered it. The two seem to share a moment, only for Timely to unexpectedly detach a lifeboat and join forces with Miss Minutes, leaving Renslayer behind. Okay. Here's where the problems of the episode really started to seep in for me. Is like, what is Renslayer's motivation this episode? Right? Why is she doing what she's doing? It's, first of all, I'm gonna say that her motivations last season were not particularly well explained. She like went off in search of free will, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's sufficiently vague that you could explain that in any way. I sure hope the show clarifies what's going on there this season.
David, my show said my T-shirt says order and chaos. What don't you understand about my personal philosophy?
My I am going to seek free will T-shirt is prompting a lot of questions that are already answered by the shirt. And so Renslayer is going off in search of free will, and like she's like disenchanted by the TVA or whatever the heck. And I was like, okay, that's not very well done plotline from last season, but like maybe we'll get better explanation this season. Okay. We don't yet. And I did appreciate that the show acknowledged that, because Renslayer is like, okay, I got to get you back to the TVA. We got to get you to stop the temporal loom. I'm like, I'm watching this. I'm like, first of all, I didn't even know Renslayer gave a shit. Like, even A, knew about the temporal loom problems. B, would give a shit. And then Victor Timely then asks, I have never felt more simpatico with Victor Timely than at that moment, because he says, well, isn't that what those other guys were doing? Like, he's like, isn't that what
the Green Wizard, which was
like,
which
amazing moment where he's like, yeah, and his butler, like the wizard and his butler, isn't that what those guys are doing? And I'm like, yeah, Ravana, isn't that what they were doing? Like, if you guys have the same motivation. And he's like, why aren't you guys joining forces? And she's like, well, I don't trust them. And it's like, okay, I guess
that's not sufficient. Like, that feels like the show really straining to produce a tension between characters that is like really, it doesn't.
Right. I mean, maybe we're gonna get some explanation later on for like why, like maybe Ravana. That's not even Ravana's mission. Maybe she's doing something else.
Right.
I hope so. But the problem is this episode, it makes no sense. Like, it's just like, okay, I guess you don't trust them. Like, it really, what would their ulterior motives be? Anyway, okay.
Even Mobius points that out. They have that one brief scene while the fight's happening on the Ferris wheel. And he's like, what?
what are we doing
What do
here?
we like,
What are we
what?
doing here?
And like, there's no, you know, like villain monologues can, you know, you take them or leave them. Like some are better than others, but at least like it's a statement of philosophy of like what you intend to do.
Right.
And here, I feel like I worry that it's going to confirm your previous suspicions that so much of it is contingent. Like it's information in later episodes will backfill why things are occurring here in a way that makes things in the moment feel deeply unsatisfying. And I don't think necessarily will make those previous moments feel better. They might make more logical sense, but it doesn't necessarily make them feel better in the moment. And
At this
ultimately,
point, what you just said is a best case scenario. Like
yeah.
that's if we even get an explanation in the future episodes, right? I hope we do. To be fair, later on, Owen Wilson does come in and say, like, is this really what free will looks like? And it's like, I didn't understand what it was before, and I don't understand what the concept is now, you know? So anyway, speaking of motivations that are not very well set up.
Well, one small thing
Oh,
before you
go ahead. Yeah.
get to that, I will say I don't know, you know, the regional background of the people who wrote this episode, single writer, multiple writers, writers room, whatever the case may be. But there is a essentially throwaway line when Victor Timely is exiting out of his laboratory and mentions that he has a laboratory in Wisconsin, and then as he's shooting out, says something to the effect of like, "Well, it's lower taxes." And David, I cannot emphasize to you how much discourse there is between Wisconsin and Illinois
Mm-hmm.
residents over the discrepancies on taxing. The two states could not have, like, Illinois is a like blue state surrounded by deeply red states like Wisconsin, Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
and the tax thing is like it feels like it was written by somebody who lives in Illinois and it's like those fucking Wisconsinites like are always going on about like the taxes down here in Chicago. And so it cracked me out because like that's such a specific regional joke
Yeah.
to make that I feel like it only could have made it all the way through writing and production because somebody was like, no, this is going to make a lot of sense to people who are from the area. Like it's going to land, And I'm here to tell you it did.
Boy, it did. This is how you can make Patrick Klepek feel seen as a Chicagoite. Is a depict any rendition of Chicago. It can literally
Mhm.
be a bunch of shacks from
Yep.
200 years ago,
And just a sign that says Chi-Town, and like I got
and
you, buddy.
also make somewhat accurate statements about Chicago's tax code as compared to Wisconsin's. Um,
That's what I'm asking for. You
that's
know,
that's all that is all Patrick wants.
look,
Um,
as a longtime white guy, David, like I'm getting it in all sorts of other ways, and so I got to like go down like the ladder. Like, what
this is
are
like
other ways?
fifth
Yeah,
order
what else? Like,
representation, right?
I'm already seen in all the movies and TV shows. So now I'm thinking about like regional tax issues and how can I
Mhm.
have that represented in the media that I consume. So
Yeah,
I appreciate you calling it out.
you're welcome. At Timely's lab, he's anxious to head to the TVA before Miss Minutes reveals her actual plan. Frustrated at eons at He Who Remains side, but stuck in a cartoonish costume? Question mark.
Yeah.
She wants
That's the best I could do describing it,
she,
David.
she wants a body. Not only that, she wants to be his love interest. Timely fumbles with a tempad and sends Miss Minutes away, only to be interrupted by Renslayer. Moments later, Renslayer is interrupted by Loki and Mobius, as Renslayer rants about order and chaos. Soon, this is interrupted by Sylvie, who spares Timely's life after he swears he is not He Who Remains and intends to help. Left alone with Renslayer, Sylvie nearly makes good on a long desire to kill her as well, but instead sends her to the end of time with the rotting remains of He Who Remains. As the episode closes, Miss Minutes claims to know a terrible secret about Renslayer's past. So that's what happens at the end of the episode. I don't think there's a post-credit sequence, from what
No.
I can recall. So, okay, so yeah, the question of what Miss Minutes is, you know, as you said, Patrick, it's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Rogue AI, I'm willing to forgive that. Oh, she's a cartoon that can actually occupy three-dimensional space. Whatevs. That's fine. Who cares? But then you show are making me think critically about what's actually going on here by like, I want a human body, and it's like, what? Like, is she like she has motivations? What is even the origin of Miss Minutes? And like, obviously, she was someone who was created by He Who Remains. I think is the question, and like became sentient over time. But it feels like a major thing to introduce in like 2 minutes, and then like, you know, maybe it will be one of the long running animating questions of the show. But so far, I find it to be a little bit confusing. What do you think, Patrick Butler?
No, I'm with you, and I grow concerned further with there are allusions to it in some lines of dialogue from Renslayer when Mobius and Loki interrupt that are along the lines of like, I've been doing this like thanklessly for eons. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems to be setting up. I don't think Renslayer is romantically interested in He Who Remains, although there are allusions to
Yes.
that in the boat
Yes.
scene. And boy, I don't know how I feel about setting up like a three-way romance, like scorned lovers plot line. Like that wasn't on my bingo card. Not something I needed explored. Does not give potentially like I don't know how Miss Minutes identifies, but like two like women who's like primary animating motivation or like big motivation is they're pissed off at this dude who doesn't care about them enough. Like that's like I don't. That's like
It gives you
deeply
the ick. It gives you
it's
the
just
ick.
it's just super low hanging fruit and deeply
Yeah.
uninteresting in a story in a setting that can do anything and whose characters should have. Well, for one, I just don't need Miss Minutes to have motivation. I just really don't like you're just be the he who like what she was saying in the beginning of the episode of like, yeah, he gave me like instructions. Like that makes sense. Seems like the kind of guy who left instructions behind for like how to do things in the timeline were I to die. But no, like she's also got to be bitter and jealous and need a body. Like, and again, it's if you start outlining all the things that need to be resolved this season in a yes, as we discussed at the top of discussing this season, I think it was at the top or episode 2 about how Marvel is potentially embracing series and having the kind of television that could. It's more of a guarantee that there'll be if it's liked that there'll be arcs that are going over season 1, 2, 3, as opposed to a one and done mini movie that's chopped up into 6 episodes. I don't know if there's Loki season 3. Like I don't know where Marvel is in plotting this stuff out. And so I can only look at this as, oh, it's so nice that we did get a season 2, but it's probably still broadly a limited series. And these changes in their production pipeline can't happen at the drop of a hat. So I need to then, on faith, believe these are going to be resolved in the next 3 episodes. And even though those episodes are an hour-ish long, there is just no way to do satisfying justice to all of this. And that's putting aside my like basic problems with these as character motivations. And so it's just kind of a bummer place to be. Because now Victor Timely is essentially like he also has like a really important arc that needs to resolve in the next 3 episodes. Like Sylvie has essentially been ignored. Like the animating factor of the previous season. The reason there was a season 2. Those characters are increasingly seeming like they're going to be sidelined in favor of, well, I hope emo Kang, feels okay by the end of this. That's just it's a frustrating place to be, even if we predicted that it was going to head in a direction like this.
Yeah, well, let's see. Let's see. The show may still have a couple tricks up its sleeves. I do think that scene in the where Victor Timely's begging for his life is like one of the most. That was when the performance really worked for me, and also like the idea is really interesting, and we've seen this many times before. Terminator 2, Miles Dyson. He's like this guy who's Sarah Connor is like, you're gonna kill humanity. You're responsible for 1 billion deaths, and he's like, that's not who I am. Like, and can people change who they are? Can people change their fate? And in the case of Sylvie, it's like Sylvie holds Victor Timely responsible for all the terrible things that have happened to her, right? Like her whole life was ripped from her. And so he's like, yeah, that's not me. That's not the idea. Can you overcome who you really are? Can we overcome fate? Those are interesting questions. And I needed to think about those questions at the same time I was thinking, does Miss Minutes just want to have a sexy body? Like is that a thing that I need to be spending my time thinking about? So yeah, there's good, interesting time travel stuff in the show,
Absolutely.
and it's mixed in with a bunch of plotting about stuff that like I think we care less about, basically.
Yeah, it's just overstuffed. It
Yeah,
is. It is. It
yeah,
is overstuffed, and I think it's easy to imagine a lot of this being the result of how like Marvel has done television shows, right? Like I've not been in the writer's room for a television series, but I have to imagine part of that is imagining, okay, what do we want to accomplish this season? And then what could be, we've talked about like pulling on the dangling threads for further seasons. If you have no guarantee of that, I can imagine as a writer, the temptation being like, well, let's get it all in here. Because if there's no guarantee of a season
right.
3, of a season 4, like there are like 4 or 5 seasons of plot threads like
Yeah,
in this season alone, and like they're all going to be given, they're all going to essentially function on, can these, what is broadly like an array of really incredible actors, can they sell us on a season's worth of development in like a couple of scenes, because there's just not time
yeah.
to
We
grant them all those moments.
we've basically been speed running like a season's worth of plot in an episode
Yeah.
of each show, and like characters come in and like are introduced, and then like we don't see them for a whole episode. We had
Victor
Raphael,
Timely could be the cliffhanger of Loki season 2. You know what I mean? Where it's like
right?
they spend all their time like dealing with like traveling, tracking these people down, dealing with like problems on branched parts of the timeline. And then at the end, oh shit, we finally stumbled into like He Who Remains, and like let's see where this goes in season 3. And it's just, instead it's, yeah, you're right. You get an entire season's worth of plot in a single episode.
I mean, I'm so curious at like what the vision was, because you have we had the Raphael Casal character, it had a whole arc last episode.
Bye. Bye.
We had billions of people being apparently exterminated last episode. We're never gonna like
Bye.
we didn't. Maybe we're gonna return to it next episode. So like I want to give the show credit for that, but or give the show that benefit of the doubt. But it's like it's odd to just drop these major things like Raphael Casal as Brad, and all these billions of people dying, and then like just go on to a different thing next episode. We're just on to a different thing. Now, again, maybe they'll come back to it, but so far it does feel like what you said. They put 35 ideas on the whiteboard, and they're like, these are the things we could do in Loki season 2. And someone just came in and said, Kevin Feige came in and was like, we're doing all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're doing them all.
And it's, and that's any show is just going to strain trying to accomplish all those things. It doesn't matter how good how clever the production design is, doesn't matter how clever the quips are, doesn't matter how talented the actors are. You just run out of room. And
Yeah.
it feels like this is a show that is like funnily enough, for a show about like rapidly expanding branches that it can't like, and it might like struggle to contain that and explode. It feels like the show is often dealing with that as well.
Yes, the show's biggest problem is it can't be contained by the plot loom
Got
of
him.
the show itself. Nailed it. Okay. Anyway,
all right. Well, we're not going to be on the writing staff for season 3. Seems that's out the window.
We are persona non grata. Okay. Well, you can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Find us across all platforms at Decoding TV. Find Patrick Klepek at crossplay.news. Check out his podcast, Remap Radio, wherever podcasts can be downloaded. Patrick, I am, the show is still really interesting to watch. Like, there's still cool stuff to look at each week, but man, it has been a really up and down first half of the season, and we're already halfway through the show. Like, I'm curious, like, you said there's no way it can tie everything up, and it's like, well, maybe, like, it's possible.
Look, I'm hoping. My expectations are, like, my disappointment comes from a place of having higher expectations,
right,
and being frustrated by a show that I wanted to match my feelings on the first. I think like that is nowhere best expressed than like this first season was appointment viewing for me and my wife, and sometimes she's like, oh, well, I guess we could watch that at the end of the weekend.
Wow.
Oh,
Oof.
damn, Loki.
Cold.
That's bad. Like, that's bad.
Is she like when she like goes to the bathroom and you're like, oh, I'll pause it, and she's like, no, you don't have to. Like,
there's a little bit of those vibes. I hate to say it. I hate to say it. And she like Tom Hiddleston is like top 5 crushes for her, and so does not usually want to miss a minute. But
he's like a hall pass celebrity for her. and
you joke, but I think, but
I wasn't joking. But he's
nor is she.
but she can't even be bothered to pause the thing while she's in the bathroom. Anyway, so I think we'll know, Patrick. We'll know a lot more at the end of next episode.
I agree.
Whether this thing's going to finish the swing, because next episode is either going to be a completely brand new set of plots, or it's going to start tying up some of the plots that have already been introduced. And if the latter, then I actually think there's some hope that this is going to mean something by the end. So we will see. Find out with us next week right here on Decoding TV. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Goodbye. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.